Welcome back from lunch. It's great to see everybody. I love this meeting we had last year. It was great. And I've loved the talk so far. So thanks everybody for being here. Status restoration of wildlife. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about wildlife today and other projects. This is a flying squirrel that Lorinda got a picture of last year cleaning out a kestrel nest box. And I think the squirrel is more scared than Lorinda was, but I'm glad she didn't fall off the ladder. But if we can provide a winter home for flying squirrels and a summer home for kestrels, that's pretty cool. Philip just mentioned that MPG North is up in the Swan Valley. Most of you are probably familiar, but it's a 200-acre property we've been managing since 2005. And we've got elk too, and we spent so much time talking about elk at the ranch, which is great. We usually have a small cow herd come through in the winter. For years we've been seeing this. During the jump trip last fall, I know Gus and several other people were there. We heard bugling at night around the campfire, which I had never heard in the Swan Valley before. It was really exciting to hear. And we've got this nice 5x5 who I seriously doubt made it through hunting season, but he was there bugling during the day. Another shot from Lorinda and a little cow herd that hung out for quite a while. So it was just neat to see that. And just continuing on sort of introduction and engagement type stuff. We recently detected our 96th bird species at MPG North, and I wrote about it in Field Note. Who knows what it is?
Goldfinch.
Yes! Free ice cream for the trivia. Beau's running amok with trivia again. We got American goldfinches. For some reason, they nest frequently in the Flathead Valley. There's tons of detections breeding there, none in the Swan that I could find of breeding on the state site. So habitat seems to suit them more in the winter, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to review a few things that I talked about last year, mostly because a lot of the projects are ongoing. You might remember I started off with this kind of silly analogy about a skunk eating an elk carcass, and I made the suggestion that, hey, we have a lot of restoration work to do, and a skunk only eats an elk one bite at a time, and so that's how we proceed with our work. It's a huge task, and we just take it one bite at a time. So I want to recap a little bit just a small bit of what I talked about last year, talk about some progress from that, and then switch gears entirely and start talking about something I'm really excited about is recently looking at some of the camera monitoring data that I've been working on. So in terms of the recap, I showed that before logging in the 60s, MPG North looked like this. Now it looks like this. It's a heavily fragmented habitat with lots of modification due both to timber development and real estate development. Some years ago, we put in this really fine-scale vegetation grid, and Debbie helped us come up with this habitat zones map. Green is forest, yellow is these open fields, blue is aquatic habitats, deciduous is this pink. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about habitats today, but you might recall that these texture-filled areas were, mostly because of invasive weeds and poor tree regen, we assigned these as poorer quality habitat. And the solid color we called, higher quality. Then we went through and tried to see, based on our criteria, we've called this poor or good quality habitat. What do animals agree, right? And so then we looked at bird species richness, and where there's red circles, that's around a count point with below average richness for the property. Green is high. And, there's not a smoking gun with this map, but, particularly with this entrance area that I'm going to talk about more today, low species richness around this area. And I showed some richness data for the habitat zones that have a kind of smaller acreage. Conifer has so many acres, it doesn't compare the same way. But species richness per acre, much lower in these fields than it is in the other sort of smaller type zones. So again, maybe birds don't like the fields so much. And then also I started showing some mammal use of the habitat, and we've done some tracking since last year, and so this is current as of now. The light and dark blue are canids. The red is, reds are bobcats in this case, mustelids, skunks. The main thing here is that, what I'm seeing from winter tracking, so mammal carnivore use of habitat in the winter, they're avoiding these open areas too. And it might be because they're open and these animals are trying to stay under cover, but also avoiding walking through deep snow conserves energy. It's important for these animals. So they're really using these forested areas with mixed canopy stuff. We don't see a lot of tracks up here typically. That's an even age lodgepole monoculture. This kind of stuff really seems to be where it's at and this here seems to be where it's at. So kind of putting that together again, looking at some of these areas that animals aren't using so much, fewer bird species were there, and trying to find ways to focus our restoration efforts on where can we make a difference for wildlife. And then I talked about this entrance field here to the property last year, fields restoration. And what I talked about last year was the desired future condition being range. I wanted to try and get bunch grass going there, create habitat that would do better for elk maybe. I talked about kestrels a little bit. And I've spent the last year trying to convince myself that this is a good idea, and I just can't. So today I'm going to describe how we're going to do something else. And what have we learned that might point us in another direction? Well, last year I said that we don't find any remnant native plants in this entrance meadow. And darn it, I've been walking around in there for the past year and I do find them. Now there aren't very many, but they're there. They tend to be low, unpalatable species like Mahonia, rose. You find aspen stems in here. They're never more than this tall, but there's aspen stems and there's more and more of them every year. There's a native sedge in the wetter areas. But there's timothy is the dominant exotic forage grass in this meadow. So competition from the timothy, I think, makes seed germination really hard. And then with things like aspen, the amount of deer, there's always a group of whitetails hopping out of this meadow when you arrive at the property. And the emergent, like the aspens particularly, always are cut at the top by herbivory. So I think competition and herbivory are keeping these potential native growth really suppressed. Last year I talked about a seeding experiment I was really excited about. We had conifer seeds coated with various materials, and some of them we didn't have coated. It was all designed to try and learn about seed germination. Some of the plots were bare soil plots where we did some site prep and pushed the seeds in. Other ones were just grass plots where we put the seeds out, made sure they had soil contact, but that was it. So what would the effect of grass competition be? Essentially, establishment is zero from any of these plots. In the rodent exclosures, rodents unfortunately defeated a lot of these. There was one that deer or elk actually stomped down and then ate the seedlings through the mesh. Very unusual. But one of these exclosures that survived did have a few seedlings, so I know that the seed stock was going to do something. We had a few seedlings come out in these and they didn't really last the year. So in the grassy plots, competition from timothy is going to make germination and establishment of an arriving species very difficult. And seed predation and seedling predation seems to be an issue. So I don't think we have a seed limitation in this entrance meadow. Seeds are coming in and landing. I just don't think they're going anywhere. And then the other thing we've learned, and we've known this for quite some time, I talked more about it last year, with timber harvest, they took this clear cut and then dug out some wetlands and spread the wetland soil all over the clear cut and then sowed it with this grass. So you can see here, this is the argillite parent material, very tight clay, very difficult to grow. And then this is the remnant of the duff layer slash pile. There's charcoal in here from burning. So this is the top of the old clear cut, basically. And then it's got anywhere from 6 inches to a meter of this wetland soil over the top of it. So if you exclose stock and mulch or otherwise deal with the plant competition, things grow very, very well in here because the soil's great. So what have we learned about the entrance meadow is that this can work. This is a metal exclosure with stuff that was planted not quite 10 years ago. And it's huge, it's growing well. There's ceanothus and forbs in this understory here. It was matted to deal with the competition. These things are going gangbusters, and I think that we can follow this approach and do a lot better for wildlife in the meadow than we would if assuming we were successful in turning this into some kind of range. So most of the people in this room, this is it might even be silly how sort of routine this sort of an equation is for the work that we do. But I like to think about these in this way. So if I want to establish plants up there, then that's going to be some function of the plants not getting eaten, having good enough soil, enough water, how competition is managed, and what happens with disturbance. So some additive factor of all of these is going to talk about whether we have successful establishment. In this case, herbivory is going to be a big problem, but soil and water are good, and competition's a big problem. Disturbance is something that I think that we haven't manipulated at North as much as I'd like to, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. So with herbivory, how do we usually deal with herbivory? We use these nets, and they take a lot of maintenance and so forth, but they do work if you keep up with them. But I'm starting to be a little frustrated with these nets. Even these are 4 feet tall and a foot across, so we've replaced all of the old rinky-dink yellow nets with these big nets. But look at all the self-shading that's going on in here when this hawthorn fills the net. This thing is not realizing its photosynthetic potential like it could if it was all spread out. Sometimes I feel like these nets artificially support the tree and it might not develop the same strength of stem wood. And Rob, you asked earlier about birds getting caught in these. I have seen a couple of robins that I've had to release one. But other things happen inside here too. Insect infestations go absolutely crazy in these sometimes because birds aren't getting in there to glean the bugs, right? And it can be a sort of unusually moist environment in here, so you'll get tent caterpillars and fungal diseases occasionally. So what else could we do? This is anecdotal, but we have some hawthorns that were planted at the same time as this that are in the bigger metal exclosures, and they're enormous. They're a foot taller, and they're as wide as they are tall. The hawthorns are this big in the big metal fences. And they're getting more light, they have a stronger stem. There aren't very many of them. It could be that they're just in an amazing spot, right? But I think that in large exclosures, these stock outperform netted seedlings. So I've proposed a 7-acre exclosure in the whole entrance meadow there with an electric fence. Herbivory goes away. And then I think that we have an opportunity to really take some time and do a careful job with this project, which I really look forward to, is working with the botanists. We'll establish some baseline plant data and continue to monitor and learn in this 7 acres, where are we getting native plants to come back? Where are some areas that we can kind of leave like they are? And then where are some areas where we want to go in and plant later? And then when we do plant, rather than the sort of more common, what we've done in the past is buy a bunch of plants and then just go out there and start digging holes and stabbing them into the ground. We actually have an opportunity here to say, okay, we want to create a food plot here because it's wet, and so we're going to put more orchardy style cultivars here. Over here it's dry, we got to plant, so we got to have a different approach, and we don't have to do it all at once. And I just wanted to mention here that both Rebecca and Catherine have been an enormous help to me in coming up with we have a list right now of about 30 species that we'd consider planting in there. And I think that'll be a lot of fun. So if we deal with herbivory and think about a planting mix, if we've got good enough soil and good enough water to do it, what are we going to do about competition? And matting, we've done a lot of matting in the past, put down these weed mats. We use a lot more mulch these days, the wood chip mulch, which I like a lot more. You have to go in and remove the mats, which gets really hard. They get roots all through them. I don't think they look as good. This is a series of 2-year-old experimental plots I put in. I called them the island plots. And I wanted to look at the effects of grass and Canada thistle competition on shrub establishment. I also did mulched and unmulched plots. And in this case, you can see the N is fairly low, so there's a lot of variability here. But for serviceberry, juniper, and ponderosa, the mulched plants did better in terms of annual growth increment. So that's the average growth over 2 years. Hawthorn, that variability wiped it out. So, the mulch works, but honestly, it should work a lot better than this. I mean, what this is saying is that serviceberry grows about, not quite 4 inches more a year if it's mulched than if it's just planted straight into Timothy competition. I expected it to grow 3 times more, right? So I think we can do a better job with competition. And so this little cartoon here is my nod to Lauren, even though she would do a lot better job than me at making this. She is the reigning champ of cool graphics in PowerPoint. So here's my serviceberry or whatever it is. And so what we're going to try this year is going in and herbiciding a large, 2 to 3 foot radius circle in the Timothy early season, plant into it, and then mulch it. And I think we can put a bigger hurt on the competition that way. It'll take a little extra time to go up there before, some weeks before planting and do this treatment, but I think it'll be advantageous. For one thing, when the planting crew does show up, they can see every place they're going to plant. It's already been decided, and it's not decided under the rush of getting the plants in the ground. It's decided by what plant should go where. And then finally, if the roots start to decompose here, the digging might be a little easier. So we'll try this with a small set of plants this year and see how it goes. There are risks when you start herbiciding a plant community and thinking you're going to plant something in it and have it do well. But it's at least something we'll try, and then hopefully years down the road when we get into the big entrance exclosure, we'll have some improved methods on dealing with competition. And then finally, I mentioned disturbance. These are Jeff Clark's pictures from, I think, 2007. We burned the entrance meadow, and so this is immediately pre and post. So I think anecdotally the Canada thistle went down a little bit after the burn, which I think has gone away. That effect has gone away now. What native propagules I'm seeing now, I think may have established during this time, because it's hard for me to believe that a Mahonia would come back through a meter of wetland soil. Maybe. And there's thin spots, but I also think some seeds may have established after this disturbance. We haven't gone back and done this kind of disturbance since, and I think in that big exclosure we'd have a terrific opportunity to do some replicated burn plots. I've seen in an old bitterbrush paper, I can't remember the author, but he designed this kind of pogo stick drill seeder that you just take out by hand and stab seeds in the ground. So maybe we could experiment with burning and seeding. There's any number of things we could do, and any ideas people have, I'd love to hear them. But we have an opportunity to look at some interesting ways to get native plants established there. And then in kind of transitioning towards the wildlife portion, last year I kind of went on this rant about restoration, and I'm not going to do that again, but I do want to talk about the big picture of what we do at MPG. And I think typically this top sort of model that I brought up, you could substitute the word restoration here, and that would be a lot of projects, right? You manage herbivory, soil and water, and plant competition, and you think about disturbance regimes, and if you get the plant community of interest back, you call it restored, right? But to me, I think that this tags onto a second equation, which is what does establishment do for wildlife? And habitat, and plant. I mean, wildlife at MPG is a pretty all-encompassing thing. So we just have to keep in mind that that's always what we need to do, is not only we need to benefit wildlife, we need to show we're benefiting wildlife. And Alan brought that up really well this morning, I think. That was awesome. So that transitions into how we're monitoring wildlife with cameras, and I'm going to do a lot of camera stuff here too that I think will supplement some of the things we've heard today. This is a bobcat on February 15th. It had been 6 months since we'd seen one on the camera network, which is actually pretty close. Pretty expected. We don't see them that frequently, but when 6 months goes by without a bobcat, it makes me really nervous. Okay, this databases, right? We're talking about databases all the time. MPG's got a database for everything. It's easy to get that in your head as this enormous spreadsheet in a server somewhere. They're really a fully user-friendly graphic user interface that I want to kind of plug a little bit here before I get into the data. This is the iPad view of the MPG North database. Anybody can log on as a guest, no password, anywhere in the world. I was in Japan recently and it worked from there. And with the push of a button, you can look at all of the images that were tagged in the last week. Or you can look at all the images in the past week except with no deer and no people. The blank wind trigger images are always gone previously. So typically there will be a few dozen to 100 pictures a week that come in tagged with species. You can log on and look at them. If there's an image you like, or if we're wrong on our species assignment, you can email it to us or email it to anyone you want. Push that button, it'll attach the picture to an email and you can send it. It's a really useful tool, really easy to use. Nick or I could set you up on your iPad in 5 minutes. You'd be good to go. This is the iPhone view, isn't it cute? Works exactly the same way. Now this is the desktop version of the database, and I only brought this up. We've got our numbers are up a little bit. We actually now have 67,806 pictures of animals at MPG North to start doing some data work with. Yeah, I'll mention that in a minute. Okay, so I want to give an example of the wildlife data I'm looking at before I step in any particular stories, and I'm going to use a bird species. It's the most frequently captured bird on the camera network at North. Who knows what it is? Yes. Ice cream prize. I think who said grouse other than Jeff? Did anyone else say grouse? Oh, I thought I heard grouse at the same time as you. But ruffed grouse. Real active, conspicuous. This is an awesome video from last year that, where's my mouse? There it is. Wait, there it is. This one didn't activate on trigger, but that's okay. So watch this grouse here. The deer has no idea it's there. Whoa, what just happened? Look at it, still like twitching. If I was that grouse, I would feel really awesome right now. I put this on Facebook and I got in a ton of trouble for anthropomorphizing about the deer. And we had to pull the post and whatever, but it was super fun. How can you not anthropomorphize when something like that happens? Okay, so I've produced a bunch of these plots. I'm just using grouse as an example. Mike put up a box plot earlier today. Box plots are a great way to visualize data, that they're a little more complicated than other ways. The dark dot here is the same as the horizontal line was on Mike's plots. It's the median of the full distribution. So what we have here is ruffed grouse image captures from 2008 to 13 per month. So this is all of April from all of those years, the numbers of captures for each month of April over those years. The y-axis is capture events per camera. So basically, we've added cameras over the years, and so I'll take the total number of captures in a given month and divide it by the number of cameras that are out there. That's something like trapping effort. Otherwise, the numbers just kind of explode when you get a lot of cameras out there. So that's why these y-axis numbers seem really low. It's divided by the number of cameras. So if you look at this median line, there's kind of an early season peak around May and then a late season peak September, some crazy outliers, and then a lot of variability in these months, which you'd expect. So maybe, males are displaying and being really obvious in the early part of the season, and then there's a lot of juveniles running around in the late part of the season. Makes sense, right? This sort of bimodal distribution. 454 total unique image captures for grouse. And we can actually break this down by year. So we have 8, 9, 10, so on. And the N is the number of captures, but now remember we're adding cameras, and so just looking at the raw number of captures can be misleading with some of these. But the pattern is what's more important. So I don't think, there were very few cameras at the beginning of 2008 anyway, but then since then we have this annual bimodal pattern. Sometimes it's stronger, sometimes it's weaker. 2010 we had a picture smack dab on a drumming log and the grouse was there every day, so we get this inflated thing. And then, we had a really hard winter, and so I wonder if in 2011 not seeing a spike here is a result of poor number of chicks being reared. It's just the kind of thing we can look at. So what questions can we start to try and answer? And I'll go back to this for a second. I consider this very preliminary data at this time, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'm just trying to explore some of the things we can do and that I'd like to get better at doing. So maybe we can help tell a story about a deer migration event that happens in the Swan Valley. And here's, just to orient everybody, it's Flathead Lake, Missoula, the Swan Valley proper, right? It's maybe 60 miles or so long. Then this is a 45-mile migration path that has been well established by biologists at FWP as a white-tailed deer migration route. In late season, late fall, early winter, deer will make their way all the way up to the Swan River State Forest, which has great thermal intercept and lots of browse, and it's a real safe place to be. And the deer escape heavy snows up here. And this was written about recently in Montana Outdoors. So what we know about this migration event and a lot of white-tailed deer migration events is that the whole population doesn't go. It's not like the pronghorns in the eastern part of the state in Canada, where the snow gets deep and they all have to leave. Some whitetails will stay, some will go, and then they might not go at all if it's not a big snowy year. So this would be a hard event to pin down. But when we look at camera data over the years, we always see this kind of thing in November. So this is a series of images from November 2011. Oh, there's an elk. Deer, deer. This camera is facing south on a north road. I have weeded out the few pictures of deer that are milling around, I mean, there were some that were heading south, and some of these are maybe duplicates. I'm sure some of them are residents. But every fall, you start seeing faces, face, 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 face on every picture you look at. So maybe there's a migration. Well, can we see this in our camera data? You'd think if the number of resident deer stays pretty much the same for a given year or a short period, then whenever a bunch of non-residents came through, you should see a pulse. So here's the same data all years. And there's not really an obvious pulse in the spring, and maybe this uptick in November, December has something to do with it. I don't know. This is only data on the 2 north-south roads, so there's no noise from some camera in the woods somewhere. So it's only a little less than 5,000 total captures here. It's just 2 cameras. But yeah, like I said, they don't all migrate. Their behavior depends on all kinds of stuff, and then there's residents around creating noise in the data. So what happens if we break it out by year? And I can't say that this is a migration right now, and that there's a lot of things with this data I'd like to improve. But look at this: we have a spike in March or April most years, and then a slight decline before the summer activity, and then we have November spike in a lot of years. Where was it? Yeah, going into 2010, 2011, big snow year, and we had a whole bunch of them, much more activity in November. So this is the kind of thing that, the kind of questions that maybe we can use cameras to answer and look at. Another thing we could do is predator-prey relationships. We have carnivores on the top, herbivores on the bottom, so we have mountain lions. Oh, and the y-axes are all different here, just to compare patterns. The numbers aren't that important for this. But, deer start showing up and being more active, and the mountain lions tend to sort of follow that. I don't mean to imply that that's causation. It's just something we can look at. Wolves and elk, the 2 modes for wolf captures happen to be when we see more elk. Of course, just like Alan said earlier, wolves are just in and out, in and out, in and out. I did not expect this, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Coyotes and snowshoe hares have this bimodal pattern that's somewhat seasonal. I don't think that they explain each other necessarily, but it was kind of cool to see that shape. And then when I first put black bears and squirrels together, I thought, oh, that's funny, I'll make a good joke out of that. And then I thought, red squirrels are building middens this time of year, and black bears, are active throughout the whole summer. I don't know, maybe they are seeking out red squirrel habitat, who knows? Again, we could do a lot more with this, but I'm hoping to continue doing that. And the bottom line with the camera data is that we've put a tremendous amount of money and time and effort into dealing with these cameras, and it's great to get fantastic imagery for the website and to share with our friends and so forth, and that's awesome. What more can we do? Because we're getting, tens of thousands of records here. So other progress in wildlife monitoring, Kellen Fusfield, she's back there, and she was our intern and now is an employee, and she's doing all this image tagging and species tagging. So, I guess I could say 2 things. I could say, that's awesome, or I could say if one of the tags is wrong, go talk to her. She's doing a great job on all this work. She's also running our video game cameras, similar to the ones Alan's using at the ranch. We've only been running those really this winter. Few of the species that we've captured and the numbers of videos of those species. And we're just getting into getting better with this. We're now setting up bait stations. So in this one, there's a little hunk of a deer carcass up here, and then we've put the camera on it. And this will help. The bait stations are really important for documenting rarer species. And so It would be very unusual and rare for an animal like a lynx or a fisher to show up at MPG North. It probably has happened. It would be really hard to detect. So we want to use the bait stations to make sure that no species goes undocumented, right? So by next winter, I think we'll have these things really dialed and have them working well. We've had a lot of trial and error this year. Like the pine marten, right? A lot of trial and error. There's one of a coyote trying to get up the tree, which is really hilarious. And then other progress just in terms of the data that we're doing. I want to give a real big nod to Spencer Bradford here. He's put us in touch with Smithsonian Wild, which is curating this global game camera database. This is a picture of a blue rock thrush I found on there, which I had just seen in Japan for the first time. And we don't know exactly how this is going to work yet, but we're working with them right now to have all of our species tagged images go directly to their server where they'll be available for research anywhere. So we hope to be a real foundational partner with them as they revision their whole setup. They're going to do a new website and everything. This is a cool opportunity. So progress and challenge in general with cameras. Well, this is one of Kellen's video cameras, right? You can't see the Buckeye camera because it's a foot under the snow, like half of our cameras have been since January. So cameras have their own things that you have to deal with. Image quality, I continue to be underwhelmed by Buckeye image quality, especially at night. I mean, what we want to answer questions like, what % white is that hare, and what's the first day when they start to change coat color? And it's so rare to get an in-focus image that it makes it hard to answer that question. But we also want these cameras to upload their data through the air and not have us have to go get memory cards. So hopefully that'll continue to improve. Trapping effort information. So right now, our cameras for the past year, we force them to take a picture every day. Just at a certain time, they just take a picture. So over the past year, I can say how many pictures with the words lap trigger in them happened for this camera. I get a number. That's how many trap days there were, right? But previous to last year, we don't have that. So the best I can do is just estimate from the number of pictures we get. Without trap effort, I'm not very confident in the numbers I put up. So that's something that will be better going forward. And then finally, our camera deployment is not uniform at all. Normally, you'd want cameras on a real even grid, but we want to get maximum number of species. So we have cameras on the ground looking into a pile of logs that's good hare habitat or whatever. We have cameras all over the place. So this kind of deployment wouldn't be very good for doing population estimates of animals or whatever. But you know, cameras just aren't very good for population work anyway. If you want to do population work, you use some traditional methods. They're far more robust. What can we learn from cameras that cameras are really good at? Things like phenology, animals waking from hibernation, migration corridors, birds' use of water sources, right? Put cameras on a water source and every animal that comes in, you can get a picture. And then if you could mark animals and do a mark recapture study with cameras, that's the best of both worlds, you know, combining traditional population methods with your cameras. The good news is we have a super high camera density. In another couple of months, we'll have 30 cameras. We have 28 right now. So we can take some sets of them out if we think they're going to bias our sample. For example, if we're getting a zillion grouse because we have that camera on a grouse log, we can take that camera out and probably not affect our data. But yeah, again, focus on questions that cameras are better at. And I think we're doing that more and more, which I like to see. So I hope I didn't go way too fast. I wanted to get it all in, and I'm super excited being up here. But again, this was a moose that showed up. This is an image from the pan-tilt zoom camera up in Entrance Pond. This moose hung out for a better part of a day up there. It was nobody in Chicago or Missoula got any work done. And the bandwidth just kept staggering all day because there were 100 people watching this moose. And you know, nobody was off task is the important thing. When something this cool happens, like a moose just shows up in the middle of the day at that property, you've got to pause for a second and think about what it means and think about, you know, how rare that is to happen and what it would take and how easy it would be for this to never happen again. If this was all a big subdivision with lawn tractors all over the place, this would be less likely. So celebrate wildlife, and thank you so much for being the people that you are. I love my job and I love what I do, and you all are why. So thank you.